Gentlemen, welcome back to the Nexa front lawn for an exciting book launch which lies ahead. The Cartiers, the untold story of the family behind the jewelry empire. We'll go ahead in just a moment, but quickly, before we do, I'd like to do another Zomato prize giveaway. So if you're seated, do have a look at the back of your seat, and if you have a red Zomato sticker on the back of your seat, that means you're a Zomato hot seat winner, and we have a prize for you. Do we have a winner? Have we found a sticker? Yeah? It's on an empty seat. Huh. I'll come back to that after the session. So the book we're launching, as I said, is The Cartiers, The Untold Story of the Family Behind the Jewelry Empire. The book is by Francesca Cartier Brickell, and she'll appear in conversation with Meru Gokhale. Francesca Cartier Brickell is a direct descendant of the Cartier family. Her great-great-great-grandfather founded Cartier in 1847. She is a sought-after international lecturer on Cartier's illustrious history and has given talks for major auction houses, museums, and societies. This book is the result of years of her independent research into her family and the business they founded. And Francesca has confirmed that she will be very happy to sign books for you after the launch. She will appear in conversation with Meru Gokhale, Editor-in-Chief of Literary Publishing at Penguin Random House, India. Please join me in giving them a very, very warm welcome to the stage. Francesca Cartier Brickell and Meru Gokhale. And I will just request that the aisles be kept clear for this session. Please do not obstruct the aisles. That's a safety issue. We have lots of space down here at the very front. If you want to come and sit on the ground, you're very welcome to do that if you're lacking a seat. But please don't obstruct the aisles.
Thank you. Can everyone hear us? Okay, well, thank you for coming. It's wonderful to see so many of you here today. Before we start, I thought it would be good if Francesca could talk a little bit about the book. Some of you will have read it, but for those of you who haven't, I would urge you to. It's an absolutely brilliant book. And do you want to tell us a little bit more about the book?
Sure. First of all, hello everyone, and thank you all for coming. Thank you. It's super exciting to be here. I hear that it's the 13th JLF, and 13 was actually the lucky number for the Cartiers. They started 13 Rue de la Paix in Paris, which is still the headquarters, so I thought it was very apt to be here this year. So I just thought I'd give you a bit of background about my book. So it was 10 years ago that my family was all in the south of France celebrating my grandfather's 90th birthday. This is a picture of my grandfather. He was Jean-Jacques Cartier, the last of the Cartiers to manage a branch of the family firm. So it was his 90th birthday, and he'd asked me to go and fetch a bottle of champagne from the cellar. And I went down there, and I was looking for this champagne, and I couldn't find it, and was about to go up empty-handed when I spotted a battered old trunk in the corner. And to cut a long story short, I went over to it, and I opened it up, and inside was not the champagne, but was hundreds and hundreds of letters, long-lost family letters that stretched back over a century, and basically told the story of my family, the Cartiers, and the firm they had founded. So that trunk of letters sent me off on a journey for the next 10 years, and I've been all over the world researching the story. I came to India. India obviously played a very important part in Cartier's history, but London, Paris, New York, all over, meeting so many people connected with the past. And the result of all that research is my book. And I just wanted to show you a quick 30-second video to give you an idea of that journey and the book.
Can we have the video, please? Wow. It's difficult to not be mesmerized by this. So
Thank you.
I want to ask Francesca now to read a section from the book so that you can kind of get a sense of how she's telling the story. Francesca, here you go.
So Meru mentioned to me this morning that she wanted me to read a section, and it's so hard to choose what to read. But I thought I would choose a bit focused on India, because India played such an important part in Cartier's past. And this story I'm going to read from now, it's when the Maharajah of Patiala, Bhupinder Singh, he came to Paris in 1925, and he was staying at the Hotel Claridge's. And he put a call in to Cartier in 13 Rue de la Paix and asked for the senior salesman to come round immediately. He had some work for him. So the senior salesman, a man called Monsieur Muffat, rushed round as fast as he could, and he was shown into the Maharajah's suite, and he was asked to sit at a table by the window, and a big box was put in front of him. And then the Maharajah walked into the room and ordered that the box be opened. And this is what happened. Muffat peered inside. It was filled with what seemed to be hundreds of crumpled pages of newspaper. As he glanced up, confused, the Maharajah urged him to look closer. Muffat carefully opened one of the sheets of paper, and a large Burmese ruby fell onto the table. As the ruler nodded his approval, Muffat kept going. The next paper enclosed a diamond as large as his thumbnail, and then another, and another. There were white diamonds, yellow diamonds, brown diamonds, diamonds with a greenish tint, others with a hint of pink. There were deep red rubies and vivid green emeralds. There were bracelets, earrings, and necklaces. Muffat, a connoisseur of gemstones who had worked at Cartier for more than 20 years, tried hard to hide his awe and assume a professional expression. The Maharajah of Patiala told Muffat that he was looking for his gems to be reset in a more modern style. He wanted, he explained, to have jewels worthy of a king. Muffat nodded respectfully and took out his notebook and silver pen. "What are you doing?" the Maharajah asked. Muffat replied that he was simply writing down each piece of jewelry and every individual gemstone in the box, so there would be a record of all the jewels that the ruler was depositing with Cartier. "I don't need that," the ruler responded quickly, never doubting for a second that Cartier was to be trusted. "Please just take them." It would take Cartier 3 years to turn the Maharajah's gems into a collection of jewels that would go down in jewelry history. There would be head ornaments, anklets, armlets, and traditional Indian jewels, from a hath pull to a diamond, ruby, emerald, and sapphire nath. More than 200 pearls were drilled to make a single bracelet. But the pièce de résistance was a necklace of such brilliance that it outshone everything else. Containing a staggering 2,930 diamonds and weighing over 1,000 carats, it was mounted in platinum and enhanced by Burmese rubies. And at its center was the yellow 234-carat De Beers diamond, the size of a golf ball and the 7th largest diamond in the world. I think we've got an image of that necklace. Can we get the image of that? Or no? Back one?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the Maharajah Bhupinder Singh's son wearing the Patiala necklace.
Wow. That's quite incredible and completely dazzling to think about all of these amazing pieces of jewelry. Now, as everybody here knows, Cartier is the world's most famous jewelry dynasty. But at the heart of their success lies a motto which some of you might not have heard of. And it is that they believe, never copy, only create. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how this motto came to be at the heart of their philosophy?
Sure. So the three Cartier brothers, they were the third generation of Cartiers. It was really them that started making their own jewelry. Up until then, Cartier hadn't produced unique pieces. It had bought them in from outside workshops and sold them elsewhere. But the three brothers had this rule, never copy, only create. And the idea was that inspiration could and should be taken from everywhere, except from existing jewelry. So Louis Cartier, the eldest brother, he didn't hire jewelry designers. He hired architects or interior designers or experts in lace. He wanted to bring something else to the jewelry trade. And the result is pieces like, hopefully this will work. So this tiara, which was kind of inspired by 18th century architecture, and was very different to what other jewelers were doing at the time. When the fashion was for Art Nouveau, Cartier were creating pieces like this. But he also was very creative in terms of the materials he used. So at the time, platinum wasn't used in jewelry. It was an industrial metal. But Louis Cartier had spotted it underneath a railway carriage. He spotted this really bright, shiny metal that seemed to be strong and thin and light and flexible. And he started with experimenting with it in jewelry. And the result was he was able to create pieces that looked so much lighter than so many of the pieces made in gold or silver of the time. For example, this piece here, made in 1912, where the diamonds almost seem to float in air. You can't see the mount at all, because he was being able to use this platinum. He also came up with the first wristwatch for men. So at the time, men wore pocket watches, and wristwatches were the preserve of women, often with a diamond or silk strap. So Louis Cartier created the first wristwatch for a male aviator friend, a pilot, who complained to Louis that he wasn't able to check his time when he was flying because he couldn't take his hands off his controls and look at his pocket watch. So Louis came up with the idea of strapping the watch to his wrist. But later on, he came up with a design for the tank watch, which remains very popular today. And that was very clever because by basing the idea of this watch on a tank, which was a very masculine image, the idea of a tank in a war, he started to change the perception of a watch. He also called the watch le tank. He gave it a masculine pronoun in French, whereas the word for watch normally in French is feminine, la montre. So he slowly tried to change the idea behind a watch to make it less feminine and more masculine. And of course, it worked.
That's so interesting because one of the challenges which he must have faced is how do you convince people that something which is at the bottom of a railway line is good enough, an expensive enough thing to set diamonds in? Or how do you convince men to wear a wristwatch? It's sort of, how did he do that?
So how?
How did he do that? How did he sort of know how to change tastes in the way that he did?
Yeah, he had this amazing aesthetic sense, and he just knew what looked right and looked good. And his school, I went, as part of my research, I went to the brothers' old school, and I saw their school reports. And Louis, who ended up being this creative genius, his reports were awful. He got more black marks than anyone in the class, and his teachers said, he's useless, he doesn't follow the rules. But that was the whole point. He didn't follow the rules. He did things in his own way, and that's what made Cartier stand out from the competition.
Yeah. No, but at the center of the book is the relationship between these three brothers who turned this company into this massive international success. Do you want to tell us a little bit about them and the relationships between them? Because for many of us here in India, it's always interesting to see how a family firm works and all of the tugs and pulls and pushes between people who are working together, and of course, they're also related to each other.
Yes, absolutely, it's true. So there were three brothers, and they were incredibly close. They'd grown up above their father's small jewelry workshop in Paris.
And do you want to tell us their names?
Yeah, so Louis, the eldest, he's in the middle. Pierre, the middle brother, he's on the left. And Jacques, the youngest, who's my great-grandfather, is on the right. So as small boys, they hadn't grown up particularly wealthy. Their father's jewelry business was relatively successful as a small Parisian business, but certainly weren't dressing kings and queens at that stage. So they'd grown up with a real ambition to create the leading jewelry firm in the world. And it's an ambition that's repeated in their letters again and again. And to do this, my grandfather told me the story that when they were boys, they came up with this plan. They took a map of the world and a pencil, and they basically split the world between them. And Louis, the elder brother, he said he would have Paris. Paris at that stage was the center of the cultural world, the early 20th century. So he said he'd take Paris. Pierre, the middle brother, said he would take the Americas. There was an increasing amount of money coming in from America. And that left Jacques, my great-grandfather. I don't think he had much say in the matter. He was the youngest. He was given England and London, and with that went the British colonies. So it was Jacques who would travel a lot to India. So these three brothers had this kind of divide and conquer. They would split the world between them. So they were each in a different place, which was crucial to their success. But also, they each had different talents. I've spoken a bit about Louis' creative genius. Pierre, the middle brother, was a brilliant businessman. He's the one who managed to sell a pearl necklace in exchange for a building in New York. And that building on Fifth Avenue is still Cartier's headquarters today.
Tell us a little more about that story. It's a fascinating story.
Well, yeah, it's a great story. So at that stage, Cartier had a very small showroom in New York, up on the second floor, nothing particularly spectacular. But it did have an incredible pearl necklace in the showroom, and the necklace was valued at $1 million. And this young bride, I think she was 16 when she married her much, much older businessman husband. So this young bride saw the necklace, and she decided that she wanted it. She was called Maisie Plant, and the story goes that what Maisie wanted, Maisie got. And her husband had a townhouse, also valued at $1 million on Fifth Avenue. And he and Pierre Cartier had a little chat, and they decided to do a swap, the necklace for the building. So Cartier got the keys, Maisie got her necklace. Cartier totally transformed the building, and I've got this great letter from Pierre back to Jacques, who said, we can start French luxury in New York. And they were so excited. And they opened the store, and it was probably the best business move of the century, because in the 1950s, when, like 30 years later, when when Maisie Plant died and her necklace was sold, it was sold for only $150,000, because by then cultured pearls had exploded onto the market, so the value of natural pearls had totally plummeted. So yeah, that's
wow. And where is the necklace now?
I think it's split up like so many of those. Yeah.
Now, Cartier Jewels are some of the most iconic pieces of art heritage in the world. Each one has a legend attached to it. There's the Hope Diamond, there's the Romanov Emeralds, there are the Panther pieces. Would you tell the audience a little bit about the story of each of these pieces? Because each piece it's like a book in its own right.
Yes, it's true. It could have been many books. I need to move this one. So this is the cursed Hope Diamond. So when Pierre Cartier was starting a store in New York, his philosophy was that they should only sell big, important gemstones, because The brothers had a rule they should never advertise. They were trying to attract royalty. If they advertised in magazines and newspapers, it wasn't the right image for them. So the best form of advertising was word of mouth. So the way to get mentioned on dinner party circuits was to sell really big, important jewels. So the Cartiers had bought this cursed diamond, and they bought it with this client in mind, Miss Evelyn Walsh McLean, very wealthy American heiress. The first time she was showed the cursed diamond by Pierre, she quite liked it, but in the end she decided it wasn't for her. So Pierre then had it reset in a new setting and showed it to her again. And she was a bit more keen this time, but still not totally convinced. And so Pierre, he was a brilliant salesman. He said he knew instinctively what to do with each client, and he knew that Miss McLean was used to getting things and not giving them back. So he said to her, why don't you just take it home for a night, see how you feel, and let me know in the morning. And she wrote in her memoirs that stone stared at me through the night, and by morning I knew I had to have the thing. So it worked. So she went to him and said that she did want it. But then in the end, she had the stone, but 3 months later she hadn't paid still. And the Cartier brothers had to start this big legal case against her. And then in the end, she agreed that, okay, she would have to pay, but by now she was a bit worried about the curse. So she took it to a church to be blessed. And she had it placed on a red velvet cushion whilst the priest blessed this diamond. And she said at that point, thunder and lightning shook the church. And where I think most people would take that as a sign to step away, I would, she thought that was a sign that all would be well. And she took the stone, and she had it her whole life. She did have a fair amount of bad luck come her way. Her husband left her. 2 of her children died young. But the stone is now in the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, where it's valued at $350 million.
Wow. And the Hope diamond has an India connection, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, initially it was meant to have been potentially taken.
Do you want to tell the audience the story of the connection of the Hope diamond with India, and also what was the curse?
What was the curse? Well, I mean, yes, it was meant to have been taken from the eye of an Indian god initially, and that's why it was said to have been cursed. And then previous owners had awful fates, like being torn apart by wild dogs, or an actress wearing it had been shot on stage, and it was in the French crown jewels, and obviously Marie Antoinette got beheaded. That wasn't great. There was a series of negative things. My grandfather told me when he found out that it had been in his family, he was terrified that there'd be a curse associated with it. So he wrote to his father from boarding school saying, "Is it true? Is there a curse? All the boys at boarding school are teasing me, saying my family is cursed." And his father wrote back and said, don't believe what you read in the magazines. It's a good way to sell a magazine or to sell a jewel, but not real.
And tell us about the Romanov emeralds. I think you've got a little bit about those.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what.
That's the panther.
Well, panther first. So obviously the panther became associated with Cartier. It was really the Duchess of Windsor, I think, who was the first to really pick up on the panther in a big way, because she was quite a strong, formidable woman, and I think liked the image of this panther. But my grandfather told me another story, because his favorite book as a child was The Jungle Book. And his father used to always read him The Jungle Book at night. And he showed me his original Jungle Book. And in it, his father had marked in the margin, and he'd circled a picture of Bagheera the panther chasing another animal. And he'd done a little note to make it into a jewel. So that you can see how the inspiration is coming, even from a father reading his son a bedtime story.
Wow.
Yeah.
And do we have anything on the famous emeralds, or?
Yeah, I think.
Oh, well, this is interesting, because one of the things we were talking about backstage when we were chatting was each of these pieces has its own history, and they're fascinating pieces in their own right, but just as interesting as the pieces of jewelry themselves are the clients who bought these pieces, because they were some of the richest, most enigmatic most powerful people in some cases in the history of the world. And just as each piece tells a story, the owner of each piece also tells a story, not just about Cartier, but also it's in a way the history of the world. So do you want to tell us a little bit about who these people are and these pieces of jewelry?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I mean, that's what always interested me, is not so much the jewels itself, but the stories behind them. And that story, you know, because jewels are such emotive things, you don't tend to give a jewel on a whim. You give it, it's often an act of love or a way of saying sorry, or someone's died and it's been passed down. So that I found that was why writing this book was so interesting. I got into so many different human stories. But also it became, in a way, the story of the world, because following the jewels is like following the money and following the power around the world. So when Cartier started, it wasn't huge initially, and so the early clients were actually the courtesans rather than the queens. We've got a courtesan there, La Barucci, on the left. And then later on, it would be the Russians, the Romanovs, you know. So on the second from the left, we've got Grand Duchess Vladimir, and she's wearing the Romanov emeralds on her headdress. She received them as a gift on her wedding. Later, of course, she would, or the Russians would smuggle their jewels out of Russia during the Russian Revolution. So whereas Russia had been the best country for Cartier in terms of clients, then Cartiers ended up buying all the jewels back from the Russians that they had sold their jewels to, and remounting them and selling them to other clients, which they did with the Romanov emeralds. So just jumping a bit, but on the far right is Barbara Hutton, American heiress, wearing those same Romanov emeralds in the 1960s.
So those are the same emeralds.
Those are the same emeralds.
And those of you who saw the Netflix series, The Last Tsars, I think there's a scene in which these emeralds are smuggled just before the execution, and they try to stitch them into their clothes and go away.
Exactly, and sometimes they even swallowed them, because that was the only way to avoid detection by the Bolsheviks on the way out. After Grand Duchess Vladimir, we've got the Duchess of Manchester wearing that big tiara I showed you earlier on. We've got the English aristocracy and the American dollar princesses who are kind of shipped over from America to prop up the English aristocracy. Then we've got the Maharajah of Patiala in the middle there. And the Indians were so important in the 1930s during the Great Depression in the West. I mean, many luxury firms went under, but because Cartier had these great big commissions from the Maharajahs, it really kept them going. Next to him, we've just got Gloria Swanson. I just thought it was fun to show her because she was one of the first kind of Hollywood stars. And so Cartier then switching their focus, instead of dressing just kings and queens and aristocrats, are now catering to actresses. And what's interesting there is that movies were in black and white, so rubies and emeralds didn't show up on screen. So they had to dress in diamonds and rock crystal. She's wearing her famous diamond and rock crystal bracelets there.
So did they actually have real diamond pieces for those?
They really did have diamond pieces, but after that, a lot of copycat firms did kind of imitation diamonds.
So for something like that, you'd have a silent movie being made and a priceless piece of jewelry as a part of the movie.
Yes.
How amazing.
Exactly, and it's a perfect advertisement, you know, whereas previously a queen wearing a tiara was a perfect advertisement. Now you've got another brilliant brand ambassador. And then we've got Marjorie Merriweather Post on the left, who was a big American Cartier client, and Barbara Hutton, as I said. But yeah, it's just that following wealth around the world. You see the rises and falls of the different countries.
Absolutely, it is just following the money over here. I just want to touch upon something that you mentioned here about how the company and their relationship with India during the Great Depression sort of helped see them through when a lot of other luxury firms were collapsing. And there's a wonderful bit in your book about the 1911 Darbar of the coronation, and there's a lovely line here which says that coronations are big business, actually, for if you're a top-end jeweler. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that, how, I can't remember which of the brothers it was who came here to find clients at the time, and how they went about meeting Indian royals and selling to them?
Yes, sure. So Jack, it was...
I think we just have to pause for a second here and maybe continue the story, because we're lucky today to have with us the erstwhile Princess of Jaipur and Member of Parliament, Diya Kumari ji, who's come here specially to launch this book. So before we go any further, I want to invite her up on stage so we can launch the book together. Diya Kumari ji, please join us on stage. Thank you so much. Diya Kumari ji, would you like to say a few words? Please do.
Anyway, it is going to be very casual.
Please come join the conversation. Why don't you come sit in the middle? No, you can just say a few words, and if you like, we can. Yeah, that's fine.
It's an absolute pleasure and an honor to be here at the launch of the book, The Cartiers. The family name is synonymous with outstanding craftsmanship, creativity, and a long history with numerous royal families, including mine. And I'd like to thank everyone associated with the book to have invited me here. I'm looking forward to reading what I'm sure is a fascinating story of the family, and all my very best for the success of the book. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Come, let me escort you around. Would you like to stay up on stage, or would you? Okay, come. Thank you so much. Thank you. See you. I think this will be a We'll leave an empty chair over here. And I think we're also kind of running out of time. So what we're going to try and do is I'm just going to ask Francesca one more question, and then she's going to close with the reading of the book. Is that okay? All right. Do you want to continue what you were saying? Because I interrupted you.
I was just going to, you asked me about India, and yes, when Jack first came to India in 1911, he came to the Durbar, and he was blown away by it all, by the precision and the efficiency. In fact, much like here today, all those people and everything so well organized. But he'd brought all these jewels to sell at the Durbar, and he'd brought all the necklaces and tiaras from Paris, and he was very disappointed because he found out that the people doing the buying were the men, and they were buying not for their women, but for themselves. And they didn't want the type of jewels that he was selling in Paris. So he had to kind of rethink all that. But when he was there, he also went around buying gemstones. And he would bring those colored gemstones back to the West. And he wrote in his diaries about how the light and the colors in India were so extraordinary. And that's what he really wanted to convey in the gems he then made for his Western clients. So India was this brilliant kind of relationship where many of the Maharajahs were going to Cartier because they wanted the top of Parisian style, and the Western clients, Europeans and Americans, were going to Cartier because they wanted this brilliant Indian influence. So it worked very well for them.
And there's a lovely bit where you talk about how the Indian royals were the last word in glamour. Yeah.
Exactly, and exactly, to have an Indian royal at your party in Europe was the ultimate.
People fought over each other to have an Indian royal to be able to host a party for them.
Exactly, brilliant.
Wonderful. And do you want to now read from the bit of the book that we discussed earlier, so that just to give you a sense of a later bit of the story?
Yeah, I thought, so as part of my journey around the world, following in my ancestors' footsteps, I also went to Versailles, just outside Paris, where my ancestors are buried. And it really struck me there. You know, I'm used to seeing the Cartier name on a luxurious showroom or glamorous clients, but there they had a kind of family chapel, and instead of just Cartier, it said Cartier family. And inside were my ancestors, and it was an important moment for me and a kind of touching moment, and I thought I'd just read a little bit from the end of my book about that. As I stood in their final resting place in that green corner of Versailles, I was struck by another aspect of the Cartier's legacy. Not just the exceptional jewels they created or the luxurious showrooms they opened, but the values they passed down and the strong bonds that they instilled. For though the world today is very different from the one they inhabited, their philosophy remains profoundly relevant. Underpinning their life's work was a focus on taking care in both senses of the phrase. Be very kind, Louis Francois, the founder, had written to his son, and over generations, this respect for others would play its part in building not just a loyal client base, but also a devoted team of employees. Young apprentices would go on to dedicate the rest of their working lives to the firm. They were looked after, and in turn, they cared themselves. And this is the other part of that taking care mindset, a resolute belief that the best is good enough, that there is no point cutting corners, because it's worth taking years to learn a skill and months to fashion a single piece in order to create something truly exceptional. A conviction that every item, from the smallest tie pin to the most extravagant mystery clock, deserves the attention and care of expert craftsmen trained in their discipline and aspiring to perfection. And finally, an unshakable faith in originality, an understanding of the subtle balance between taking inspiration from the old and relentlessly innovating for the future. Never copy, only create.
And before we leave, I think we have 2 more minutes, and I want to end the session by asking Francesca, what is your favorite piece of Cartier jewelry and why?
Gosh, such a hard
If you had
one.
to pick one of these dazzling jewels, which one would it be?
It does change, but I do love the tutti frutti pieces where Jack bought carved emeralds and sapphires and rubies from India and took them back and put them together, a bit like this brooch here. And there was one amazing necklace that he made for a Western client, Daisy Fellows, which was kind of the ultimate example of that. The collier hindou, he called it. And that was truly exceptional. And what was interesting is that those jewels were big in the 1930s, in the Depression years, because the carved gemstones he bought in bought in India back to England, were actually the least expensive ones. He wasn't buying a big ruby or a big emerald. He was buying one that had been carved, so it could be smaller or the imperfections could be carved out. So they were less expensive. They're more affordable in the Depression years. And yet today, it's those pieces that reach absolute records at auction because they're so original and so unique and emblematic of that time. I might have one image of it here. I'm not sure. Sorry. Sorry, that is another great piece. That's another great piece. Here. So this type of mixture of colours together. That's Daisy Fellows wearing her necklace, but it's in black and white, unfortunately. But yeah, that was a very special piece.
Wonderful. Well, Francesca, thank you so much for being here in Jaipur. And thank you, audience, for listening so patiently. And please do read the book. And Francesca is going to be signing now. Thank you very much.
Once again, thank you to Francesca, Cartier, Brickell. Congratulations on the launch of the book, The Cartiers, The Untold Story of the Family Behind the Jewelry Empire, sorry. And our thanks to Meru Gokhale also for facilitating the launch, and to the erstwhile Princess of Jaipur, Diya Kumari. Francesca is signing, so please do go along to the JCB Prize for Literature bookshop. You'll find the book there, and then you can return here to the Nexa front lawn. You'll find the book signing area at the back at the Z kiosk, which is built out of wood. It's got blue and white signage in the far right corner of the Nexa front lawn. That's where the author signing will take place. Now, I'm still looking for my Zomato hot seat winner. I believe that it was the second or the third row back. There was a red sticker on the seat. Does somebody have a red sticker on the back of their seat? Yes? You've won a prize. It's a Zomato hot seat. Please come to the stage and our volunteer will give you your prize giveaway. Please come forward. Thank you. Congratulations. And the next session happening here in 10 minutes will be Shashi on Shashi. That's Shashi Tharoor in conversation with Michael Dwyer. That session will be presented by Outlook. Obviously, we're attracting a very large crowd at the moment, and we will have to keep the aisles clear. So I will ask you to come and sit down the front if you can't find a seat in the aisles, but we can't obstruct the aisles.